Relationship Helpers. I'm Laura Ketchy, and I am joined by my husband, Vincent.
Hello.
I hated football early in our marriage.
It's the truth.
And in one way or another, I let Vincent know about it.
She doesn't like it much now either, but go ahead.
Unfortunately, I let him know while we were at the actual football games. The sun was too bright. It was too hot. No one scored. The wrong team scored. It didn't matter.
It was too cold.
Yeah, that's another one there right there.
Yes, that was your last one.
I made a big deal out of it, but I don't think I do this now. It's important to me that my husband spend time doing something that he enjoys, and I can muster the wherewithal to be pleasant and show him support. I don't have to complain. I can look for the silver linings.
Right.
So we all have Eeyores and George Castanzas in our lives. These are people that are chronically negative.
Well, and for those, I guess maybe younger audience or different ones that maybe don't know who Eeyore is or George Castanza.
I would hope that younger people would especially know who Eeyore is, considering he's a children's book character.
Maybe they should know who Eeyore is.
Yes.
So he's the donkey, right?
The chronically negative, depressed donkey.
With Winnie the Pooh.
Yes.
Okay. And George Costanza.
George is the chronic complainer.
Well, he's
of the
neurotic.
Show. Highly neurotic.
The highly neurotic New Yorker that's the friend of Jerry Seinfeld on the TV series Seinfeld.
He usually starts a ruckus. He gets in trouble because he blows things out of proportion.
Right.
So anyway, Eeyore, George, they're Debbie Downers. They don't see the good things that are right under their noses.
Who's Debbie Downer?
That's just a common phrase.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, a Debbie Downer. Yes. Okay, so in today's podcast episode, we're going to discuss something called magnifying. This is our second in a series on anger in marriage. So we're going to talk about magnifying.
Right. Our first one, if you didn't listen to it, it was on blaming.
Yeah, be sure to tune into that one. It's about not being a part of the blame game, how to not be a blamer.
Right.
Okay, so magnifying. What's magnifying? That kind of sounds kind of weird. That's a weird term. Magnifying is basically this. It's blowing things out of proportion. A person who magnifies exaggerates, and they provoke angry responses.
Right. So their purpose of doing it is to get a reaction.
Kind of get a rise.
A rise out of someone else. So especially in marriage, it's getting a rouse out of your spouse. But people do this with their friends or with their parents or with anyone, right?
Yeah, and this could be intentional or unintentional.
Right.
There could be self-awareness, or there may not be self-awareness.
Yeah, they may be subconsciously doing it, not realizing that's what they're doing.
And we are going to get a little further into that and look at who actually magnifies. And what we found as counselors is that the people that are kind of guilty of magnifying fall into one or a few different camps. The first one is depression. A lot of people who magnify are people who are depressed.
Right.
We look at the terminology emotional reasoning when we look at depression oftentimes. What's emotional reasoning? It's a negative thinking habit. It's a false belief that because something goes wrong that everything else will. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, well, if the alarm clock didn't go off this morning and I woke up 30 minutes late, then that means, the whole day is going to be bad.
Right. Or it could be like, well, the first of this podcast didn't sound very good. Our voices weren't very good, so the rest of it's not going to be good at all. That's
emotional reasoning. And if we could dissect emotional reasoning, I mean, we could come up with bukus of examples of emotional reasoning. And if you know anyone that's depressed, you could probably see emotional reasoning peppered throughout their day. how they use emotional reasoning.
Right. It really characterizes depression.
But we can take a look at Eeyore, as we mentioned earlier, as someone that is depressed and that uses emotional reasoning. He's chronically negative. He is a master of exaggeration. He has trouble seeing good in his life, and he has trouble seeing all of the support that he has from his friends. I mean, that's the great thing about the Pooh Bear stories is, you've got Pooh and you've got Piglet and Tigger, Rabbit, Owl, and Eeyore.
Right. So he's not lonely.
You're right. He's got a group of friends around him. And one of the greatest things about this Pooh Bear story and Eeyore is that even though Eeyore is chronically depressed and negative, his friends don't leave him.
Right.
But that's kind of a side note
right,
there.
Yeah. Well, and more you think, I shouldn't think more about Pooh, but where did the tiger and the bear come together with a donkey and rabbit? Wow,
it's a children's story.
Okay. Yeah.
Don't think too much about.
Okay, don't put too much into it.
No, this isn't an episode of Nature from PBS.
Right. Yeah, that wouldn't work. Yeah,
They're not eating each other.
Yeah, we went to the zoo. That wouldn't work putting them all together, would it, in real life?
Okay, sorry. Okay, so that was a little rabbit trail right there. Did you see what I did with that pun?
Yes.
But anyway, one thing that they do focus on in terms of eating is honey. Obviously, Pooh Bear is the lead in the stories. And what motivates Pooh? Honey. Just about all the Pooh Bear stories that I'm familiar with, there's honey involved somewhere. And it's usually his motivation. It's what he's after. So when we think about Pooh, we think about Eeyore. Think of it this way. Eeyore can't see the honeycomb for the bees, whereas Pooh, on the other hand, gravitates towards the beehive. And oftentimes he actually recruits his friends as helpers.
Right. So you've got Pooh there, who the way he magnifies is he sees
Not Pooh, Eeyore.
I mean Eeyore, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, so Eeyore, he sees the beehive. He sees that up in the tree. And for him, he's like, oh, this is horrible. Pooh's going to get stung 1,000,000 times. He's exaggerating. He's maybe saying it out loud, or at least saying it in his head. And he's like, we're going to get all stung. We're going to get hurt. This is going to be a terrible day. That's Eeyore. That's his thoughts. That's what he's saying. Whereas Pooh says...
Well, Pooh's able to take a difficult situation and see the good in it. I mean, he's got honey on the brain.
Right, so Pooh's excited.
And he's like, the more the merrier. I've got friends to help me climb the tree.
Right, he only sees the positives in the whole situation.
He's got an end goal in mind, and he's motivated, and he has friends to help him, and he's going to do it.
Yeah, so he's going to get the honey, be excited about the honey, be able to share his honey with others so they'll all have a good time.
Exactly. Such a silver lining thinker, that Pooh Bear. So another thing that people that magnify sometimes struggle with is anxiety. Someone that has issues with anxiety, it's kind of like they have a worry monster in their head. And that worry monster dictates what they do, what they say, and how they behave. And this really bleeds into relationships. It negatively impacts relationships because anxiety is a very self-focused type of thought pattern, because it really ignores the needs of other people.
Yeah, you're really just being egocentric, I guess.
Yes, and that may be a jagged little pill for somebody to swallow, somebody that's struggling with anxiety, because you may be thinking about others a lot. Right. You may be worrying about others a lot.
But you're definitely not thinking about God and making him your focus.
That's
right?
Yes. And not depending on him to lighten the load.
So it's kind of hard to be God-centric and worry.
Right.
That's really, those are kind of opposites there.
Yeah, and it's also hard to be grateful or worshipful when you're anxious, too.
Right. It's hard to have that attitude of praise.
So whatever the case, if someone has struggles with anxiety, oftentimes they have issues with relationships too.
Right.
Because they're not able to put the energy into the relationship that they're putting into the fear, worry, and anxiety.
Right, or at least they're really irritating the person they're with.
Exactly.
The person they're with's not enjoying that, and many times one of the methods that they annoy the person they're with is this magnifying.
Exactly. So a common theme that you and I see as marriage counselors is a couple that will come in and one or both spouses is complaining about the in-laws.
Right. It's one of the in-laws, or sometimes it's both the in-laws is getting on their nerves, and yes.
So one situation may be like Christmas at the in-laws, and I want to remind everyone that we do have a podcast episode that's specific to that particular topic. It's called Stress-Free Holidays. I'd highly recommend you check that podcast episode out if you struggle with trying to make arrangements with in-laws, spending time with them, and how to make it go a little more seamlessly.
Right, and that's at relationshiphelpers.net.
Right. That's an earlier podcast episode that we did several months ago. But back to the example of spending Christmas with the in-laws. This, like I said, common theme that we see in couples counseling. What could happen is something like this. A spouse could ruminate over a particular in-law and how disagreeable that person is. And then meanwhile, they're really missing all the good things that are happening around them. I mean, they may not even notice the happy, good things that are happening with their own children, or that particular in-law that they're so crabby about is actually maybe being nicer than normal or something like that.
They're coming in with that attitude and they're saying things like, wow, she's just horrible. She never considers the kids or me,
So they may actually miss when that person is considerate.
My mind goes to 16 Candles with the grandmother and the cigarette hanging out right over with the ashes just about to drop off into the cooking on the stove or the frying pan on the stove. I don't know why that comes to mind, but
I believe that's actually National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Maybe it's both of them.
It could be.
I believe it's 16 Candles.
Same author.
Maybe so. Yes, true.
Same author.
True. Yeah, so those kinds of things are thinking, oh, how horrible they are, when maybe they actually brought the turkey or they brought a lot of the food, and they're not focusing on the positives that the person brought. Not that ashes in your food is not horrible. That is horrible. I don't want to minimize that. Or it could be, for some it may be, let's say on the husband's side, he's with the father-in-law, and he is like, the father-in-law is just unbearable. He's continually talking about how he hates the Republicans, or that they're always doing this and ruining his life, or the opposite way, or he's complaining about Democrats and what they're doing and how they're ruining his life, or somehow in politics, and I have to listen to that the whole time, and that's
true. That's another theme that we actually see in counseling is, people of different political ideologies, and they're having to actually spend time at that person's house, and, that person's particular favored news outlet is on TV 24/7 or whatever.
Right. So that in the relationship could be, magnifying really how bad it is to have a conversation with someone on subjects like that, opinionated subjects or whatever it may be.
So that's anxiety. We're going to look at something that is kind of an offshoot of that kind of goes hand in glove with anxiety, and that's perfectionism. A person with perfectionism usually is struggling with some kind of fear. It could be like a fear of failure or a fear of rejection, and yet again, this fear, this anxiety, this worry, this perfectionism, it bleeds into relationships.
Right. They feel like they can't make a mistake. If they will, they'll be criticized, or they'll feel guilty.
And so what ends up, and what ends up happening is this person is so focused on controlling something that they end up controlling someone.
Right. And when they're focused on controlling these certain aspects, whatever it may be, their perfectionism, which could be speaking. It could be perfectionism in continually correcting your spouse and how they talk or their grammar, or it could be cleanliness in the house or how things are arranged, or could be the yard.
So it could be nitpicky.
It could be nitpicky on lots of different things. Yeah, and of course with kids too, nitpicking the kids and how they do in school or how they perform.
So that sets a tone right there.
Right.
When someone is nitpicky of another person, it already creates an atmosphere that's already a bit hostile.
Right.
And so that really doesn't lead to productive conversations.
No. And so so let's talk about how they magnify things, these perfectionistic people.
Okay. An example could be something such as this. You have a couple and they drive down to Disney World together, and the one person says the car ride we took to Disney was horrible, which really implies that the other spouse's company was bad.
Well, it
could.
Yeah, it could be that they thought the company's bad, or maybe it was going back to they were upset because the other person was not using correct grammar, or maybe this perfectionistic person wanted to leave at a certain time and they missed out on leaving at that certain time. So then they got stuck in traffic at this one place, and so it ended up taking longer that they had already planned out in their mind that the trip should have taken for them to arrive at the right time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This perfectionistic person, that's how they're thinking.
I'm almost afraid to use this terminology because I think a lot of people are going to relate and throw fiery darts in their minds at me, but it's like spreadsheet mentality.
Well, maybe so, yes.
It's the person, the person that has the itinerary created on a spreadsheet, and they've got things down to every 5 minutes, and there are people like that.
Sure, yes.
And
too planned. Not that planning's not good, but you need to be prepared.
Well,
Boy Scouts.
There's a strong lack of flexibility with that, and that doesn't allow room for kids throwing up in the back seat on the ride down there, or
a cow getting loose and getting on the interstate, or
a storm or a car accident.
Yes, or whatever it may be that may take them away from their perfect route to Disney.
Right. And they miss out on, you could be sitting in bumper to bumper traffic, but your family could be singing songs or telling stories or all these things that could be good.
Right. It actually could be a time where they could spend together and learn more about each other.
Right.
Or discussing something. Or, when maybe what really happened was the traffic only set them back 45 minutes, maybe 30 minutes.
But in that 45, 30 minutes, they could have shared something with one another they've never heard, or remembered a funny story together that really got them all in a better mood and thinking about better days.
Yes, but this perfectionistic person, what they may end up doing is magnifying, saying, wow, this was a horrible ride down. I'm never going to do this again, or this is terrible, the time we spent in that car together, confined. I don't know. Okay,
so that's the perfectionist. Let's take a look at something a little more complicated. We see this in counseling too. This is personality disorders, how those can impact relationships. I mean, in terms of magnifying. Right. People with personality disorders often struggle with relationships. One of the biggest red flags that someone has a personality disorder is their inability to recognize their faults or see that they have issues.
Yeah, so in some ways I think of it, they're actually in ways perfectionistic, maybe, these personality disorders, but they lack that discernment of how unhealthy they are. Mm-hmm. They don't recognize it.
And so what ends up happening is everyone else is to blame. And so they'll behave dramatically to emphasize their reactions, just to show how bad others are. But really, in reality, this person is in a great deal of denial. And I don't want people to think that people that are in denial have personality disorders.
No.
It's not the same thing.
No.
I think you could say this. Just about all people who have personality disorders have denial, but not all people that are in denial have personality disorders.
Correct. Yes. Yes. But definitely people with personality disorders have a great deal of denial. They're kind of more to the extreme on the denial end.
That's why they're one of the most untreatable mental health diagnoses there are, is because they aren't willing to accept that they have issues and that they need to work on things.
Right. Yeah. They're not willing to at least consider that.
So in essence, folks with personality disorders, you may have heard these. They're becoming more common in the vernacular. You're hearing more these days about narcissist and borderline personality, histrionic, these different terms. These are different personality disorders, and there's others as well, antisocial.
And these are people
like
on the extreme.
And they are. But they do exhibit, however, magnifying.
Most definitely.
Okay. We won't spend a lot of time today on personality disorders because that could be Pandora's box, and we can make it our own other episodes out of those.
And I don't like to use labels on either. The way I would say is they're on more of the extreme end when a person gets to the point where you'd say they have a personality disorder.
Okay.
They're on the extreme end of denial, let's say.
Okay, so we've taken a look at personality disorders and perfectionism, anxiety, and depression. These are all different camps that people kind of belong in that exhibit magnifying behavior. So what can we do about magnifying behavior? So I would first recommend taking a look at yourself and asking yourself, am I exhibiting signs of depression or anxiety, or am I a perfectionist? Am I in denial about something? And if you answer yes to any of these questions, it's really important that you seek help and look for a professional's guidance in treating these issues, because it really will improve the state of your mental health, but it also will improve your relationships. Okay, so another thing is catching yourself in the act. So you may actually find the words coming out of your mouth. You may be saying, "This is horrible." Oh.
Right. So.
Oh, this is terrible. Oh. You may catch yourself mid-sentence starting to magnify, or right as you're saying it. And so being able to catch yourself is going to be really important. And ask yourself this when you're saying these things. Is it really that bad? Okay, I'm irritated right now, but I can deal with it.
Yeah, so it's really assessing what's happening right then in the moment. And is it really true?
Right. Because what you find with people that struggle with this, it's like their gauge is broken. Their emotional gauge is broken. Their ability to recognize something as being terrible or good or great.
Well, and it's a habit. It's a habit of doing that. It's a habit of going and saying, "Wow, this is horrible. This is terrible.
Extremes.
This is these extremes." And as we mentioned in the beginning, it's this habit of saying this so that they get a reaction out of somebody nearby them. Now, of course, some people are saying this to themselves and nobody's nearby, but many times they're saying this to get a reaction from someone else, and it's just a habit they've used to get that reaction, get that attention from someone else. That
could be a very deeply rooted, heavily conditioned kind of behavior that's happened over decades. Even
right.
Could have started during childhood.
Right.
Speaking of others, there may be situations or people that are listening right now that they may not be the ones that are magnifying, but it's their spouse that's doing that. So what can what can you do when you're not the actual person that's magnifying, but you're the listener? So I think it's going to be important for boundaries in that situation.
It will be for the other person. Now, if we look at the Bible, Paul says a lot about this. The Bible says a lot about this. And there's numerous instances where Paul, of course, he speaks, I think it's in Philippians, to focus on what is
pure and lovely.
Yeah. What is healthy, what is positive. He goes through the whole thing. We're to focus on those things that are noble, that are, and he goes a step further in different letters that he writes to the churches, and he says, praise God continually. Sing praise songs while you're, he takes it even a step further. Instead of us saying these negative things or seeing this negative side, but actually praise God. So what's going on there is he's talking about getting your focus off of yourself, really, and your circumstance, because if you think they're magnifying things, but they're really focused on the circumstance is what's going on.
Take a look at that situation, Vincent, because if you think about it, so he's in jail with all these other prisoners. They're shackled up. He's singing praise songs, and at that point, an earthquake happens, and everyone's shackles come off. Not just Paul's. Everyone's shackles come off. Right.
So, and even early Christians, they saw suffering for Christ if they were to have, as Paul was, and they were learning this from Paul, and of course the apostles as well, the other 12, or the 12 disciples, or 11, that it was an honor to suffer for Christ. These circumstances, to be put down in front of other people, to be jailed, and then of course to be martyred. I mean, that was kind of the ultimate that the apostles did. Many of the apostles did. They gave their lives for Christ. And even Peter, he didn't want to be crucified like Christ, so he was crucified upside down. He felt like he wasn't even worthy to be crucified the same, upright like Christ was. And so they were rejoicing, and this goes back to James. This is the book of James. James says to rejoice in your trials, in your suffering.
Right, and that's a very different way of, I think the Christian definition of martyr and the psychology version of the word are very different.
Right.
And it's important. The distinction between those two is very important.
Right, yeah. So the Christian version of a martyr, these people are joyful, they're excited, they're cheerful that they are representing Christ.
They're living on purpose.
They are. And if they're suffering, so be it. They're suffering for Christ. They're doing it all for Christ. And that they see that as they're storing up treasures in heaven by doing that. And that's how they see this. These sufferings they're doing for Christ here on earth, they see that as storing up treasures in heaven for themselves. And they rejoice over that. They're like, look at the opportunity I have to suffer for Christ, to build, which is just a totally, what am I trying to say? It's a heavenly view of what's going on, not an earthly view.
It's definitely counterintuitive.
Yes.
It is. So to kind of take this off full circle and look at how we can apply that heaven mindset to an earthly experience.
Right.
Let's apply it to one of these examples we've given. How about the one with going to the in-laws or the trip to Disney?
Okay. Well, I mean, first of all, it would be a person who's not magnifying, that they are rejoicing in their trial, would be like, wow, what a wonderful opportunity for us to, as we said before, spend more time with the kids and finding out more about what's going on in their lives. In a confined environment.
Yeah. So this is really a good opportunity to kind of dig deeper with the people that are in the car, your captive audience.
Right. It's kind of a forced thing, which can be very good. Or, hey, this is an opportunity we can learn together, which may be, I don't know, listening to a tape in the car together and then talking about it. Or this is an opportunity oh, what a great opportunity that I can model. Oh, this is really thinking outside of the box. That I can model patience for my kids.
Oh,
Wow.
This is loaded.
Yeah, I mean, that's a person looking like, wow, look at the opportunity I had to suffer here so I could model patience for my children. What an opportunity God gave that they could watch me through this whole time while I sit on, I don't know where it would be, I-75 or something like that.
All right, folks. So we've talked a lot about negativity and how it can really impact relationships, I think, today, specifically magnifying. I hope that what we've had to say has been helpful in helping you determine whether you magnify or if your spouse magnifies. And I hope that what we've had to say will help you actually overcome those behaviors and replace them with positive ones.
Right, positive biblical behaviors.
Thanks for joining us today.
Goodbye.
Thank you for joining us today on Relationship Helpers. It is our hope that you gained some valuable information. For the show notes and more information on today's topic, please visit www.relationshiphelpers.net. Again, that is www.relationshiphelpers.net. If you enjoyed our show, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review. If you had questions or concerns about our show, please let us know about this as well by going to our website, www.relationshiphelpers.net. Thanks again and have a blessed week. Note that accuracy and authority in regards to the subject matter covered today is not a replacement for professional care. Neither the host, the clinicians, or the guests are rendering clinical or other professional advice. Seek professional help if you need it.